For the start of the biology unit, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the difference between our different types of cells. And now cells can be classified in a number of different ways depending on their complexity or the parts that are found in them. And all of this is based on our cell theory. And we had an original cell theory that said cells are the basic unit of life. And they were discovered obviously by Robert Hooke using early microscopes. And he was looking at the complexity of cork. And ultimately, cells can be put into two large classes: prokaryotic cells, which are early cells and simple, and eukaryotic cells, which are much more complex. Prokaryotic cells are the first types of cells that evolved. So, our classic cell theory says all living things are made of cells and their products. New cells are created from old cells dividing in two, and cells are the basic unit of life. Now, this was a rather simple idea of the cell theory, and with other research, we were able to flesh it out a bit more and give it a bit more detail. It said that the cell is the fundamental unit and structure of living things. Cells exist from pre-existing cells dividing. Energy flow occurs in cells, and cells have to contain some hereditary material, usually DNA, and they pass from that cell to other cells. Cells are basically the same in chemical composition. So if I looked at a cell from a yeast and I looked at our cells, they generally have the same makeup. Now they have a few different arrangements of the things, but they have the basic makeup, same makeup. All living things are made up of one or more cells. If we're made up of one cell, we're called unicellular, and if they're made up of two or more, they're called multicellular. Okay, and the activity in an organism depends on all of the activity of the individual cells working together. Now, prokaryotic cells are our simplest type of cells. They have no internal organization. And more importantly, they have no nucleus. Now, nucleus is where we contain our genetic material, and they're pretty simple, and they fall into the categories of bacteria and archaeobacteria. Archaeobacteria, these are just ancient types. They're very simple, very small, and they were the earliest types to evolve. Whereas a bacteria cell has some simple organization in the cell, but they don't have what we call organelles yet. And it does not have a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, however, are much larger and they're bound by a membrane. So something surrounds different things and forms compartments within them. And within these membrane bound components, we call them organelles. They have a nucleus, so they have their genetic material surrounded by a membrane. We have many different types. Everything besides bacteria fits into this category. And humans contain about 14 trillion of them. Okay, and so we can see here a flowchart just showing the different types and complexity. Now we can break it down into, okay, almost all prokaryotes are single-celled or unicellular organisms, and eukaryotic cells can be both singular and multicellular. And the reason being that the complexity of the eukaryotic cell allows for greater diversity of cells and cooperation between them. So just a quick comparison. Prokaryotic cells are smaller. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells have a membrane-bound organelles. They both can have what's called a cell wall. They both have cell membranes. Prokaryotic cells are very simple in their cell membrane. Eukaryotic cell membranes are much more complex. They have other things embedded in it that allow the cells to talk to each other. They both have cytoplasm. This is fluid within the cell. They both have genetic material. Just the amount and complexity of that genetic material is different between them. And they divide to give new cells in different processes. Prokaryotic cells divide in a process called binary fission, while eukaryotic cells use a process we call mitosis. So what's an organelle? An organelle is something that has a membrane around it. So think of like a balloon blown up. And within that blown up balloon, we have specific things in it that allow that balloon to do unique functions. And so if we think of their classroom as our cell, we could have many balloons within it, and each of those balloons could have a unique feature depending on the things that are in it. We would call the balloons or the membrane bound things our organelles, and the classroom itself would make up the entire cell. And these membrane bound structures will interact with each other to perform different cell functions. Okay. Most of the organelles are found in both plant and animal cells, and this shows how early they evolved. But there are some that are unique to both plant and some that are unique to animal cells. And this leads to different structures in them. Okay, so what types of organelles do we have? Well, both plant and animal cells have what we call a cell membrane. Okay, and it separates the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell and controls what and how things get inside of the cell. And we can see an animal cell here on the left and a plant cell on the right. And an animal cell, the cell membrane is the last thing before we go outside, whereas in a plant cell, they have an extra feature which we call a cell wall. Okay, and they both have cytoplasm, and it includes our organelles and other fluids and sugars and water. Helps to keep the cell alive. So here's an example of a cell membrane. And our cell membrane we say that it has two layers, but more importantly, we can see that there's other things embedded in it that help to control the flow of material in and out of the cell and allows for the cell to be identified by other cells. Okay, a feature that is very important for eukaryotic cells and for a cell to be classified as eukaryotic cell is our nucleus. And our nucleus is a membrane-bound region within the cell, and it contains our genetic material, and it has all the information, tells each individual cell what to do. Okay? Each cell within your body contains a complete set of all of your genetic material, just only some of it is used at a time in each cell. Okay, and so here we can see our genetic material in both of the cells. The genetic material for plant and animal cells is DNA. And we can see in both of them that there's many pieces. Okay, and here's an example of our DNA, and we'll talk more in depth about the DNA, but it's long strands, but it wraps up and forms complex structures, which we call chromosomes. And we'll talk about these more later on in the unit. Another common feature in both plant and animal cells is something called a ribosome. And ribosomes are important in protein formation. Okay. Another feature they both have is a mitochondria. Mitochondria helps to convert sugar into a type of energy that the cells can use. So it's a conversion factory. It's often called the powerhouse of the cell. But really what it does is it takes glucose or sugar and sometimes other molecules and converts it into the correct energy currency for the cell. It's like if you went to the States and you brought Canadian money and they converted it to American. So now you have American money you can spend in the States. So the mitochondria takes glucose and converts it into molecules that the cell can use for energy. And we can see the complex structure of the mitochondria is what allows for its function. And all of the little things you see going in on both of these is its membranes, complex nature on the inside. And then we have what we call our endoplasmic reticulum. This is like the canal system within the cell. It's what allows for things to transport throughout the cell. We have our Golgi apparatus, which helps it to maintain its structure and move organelles around. Now, a unique feature to animal cells is a lysosome. And lysosomes have digestive material, so they help the cell to digest large molecules. And also, when the cell starts to get old and is not functioning properly anymore, the lysosome will help to kill the cell. Another feature that is only found in animal cells is a centriole, and that's important for mitosis. And we'll talk about its uh, role when we talk about cell division. Both plant and animal cells have a vacuole, but a plant cell has a large vacuole, while animal cells have much smaller ones. The large vacuole in a plant cell is important because it's what allows the plant cells to be nice and firm. And you can see what the impact of this. A vacuole stores lots of water. So if you've ever had celery that you've left out on the counter over a day, after it's been on the counter, it gets all floppy because it's lost a lot of the water that was in its vacuoles. But if you put it in, you allow it to absorb more water, that vacuole will fill up and it'll allow the celery or the cells to become much more solid and rigid. Okay, another feature that's just in plants is the cell wall. Okay, and this is a rigid feature that helps to give the plant cell its strong structure so that they can stand up straight, and it helps to protect the cell from the outside environment. And finally, a plant cell also has a chloroplast. This is where photosynthesis occurs.